For decades, China was the world's factory, producing cars, phones, clothing, steel, and chemicals on a scale no other region could match. This power lifted the country's economy to more than $40 trillion in purchasing power parity and nearly $20 trillion in nominal terms. But now, the mechanism that fueled growth is starting to falter. Factories are moving production abroad, wages are rising, and debts are piling up faster than the economy itself. At the same time, the workforce is shrinking and competitors are gaining ground. This is no longer just a story about trade figures. It is about an economic model that once seemed unstoppable, now losing momentum. To understand China's current position, one must recall how it built its industrial dominance and why its rise was so fast and powerful. That past explains the challenges shaping its future. In the late 1970s, China was still a poor country that had endured famine and failed reforms. Everything changed in 1978 when Deng Xiaoping came to power and launched a bold experiment known as reform and opening. Instead of rigid state control, he created special economic zones on the coast where foreign companies could invest and operate more freely. These zones became magnets for capital, technology, and know-how from the United States, Japan, and Europe. Factories began to spring up in places like Shenzhen, which transformed from a fishing village into a metropolis within a single generation. Cheap labor and its vast supply gave China a unique advantage. Multinational corporations shifted production eastward, seeking low costs and access to a market of 1 billion people. The turning point came with China's entry into the WTO in 2001, which fully integrated it into global trade networks. Electronics, textiles, and machinery poured out of Chinese ports, while investment grew at record speed. From 2001 to 2024, China's GDP rose from almost $1.5 trillion to $19 trillion. In purchasing power parity, it surpassed $40 trillion, becoming the largest in the world. This is how China became the workshop of the planet, but its model of success, based on cheap labor and mass exports, is now under intense pressure. The forces that once drove growth are beginning to weaken. China's rise as the world's factory relied on an endless flow of cheap labor. Millions of young people moved from villages to cities year after year, working on assembly lines for just a few dollars a day. That advantage is disappearing quickly. In 2013, the average industrial wage was about 46,000 yuan. 10 years later, it had reached 108,000, roughly $15,000 a year. That is still below Western levels, but far more expensive than in India, Vietnam, or Bangladesh, where factory wages are only a fraction of China's. Demographics are adding further pressure. China is no longer the most populous country. In 2023, the UN confirmed that India had surpassed it in working-age citizens willing to work for less. Within China, the workforce is shrinking and aging. The average age has nearly reached 40, compared to 30 in the mid-1990s. For every 100 working-age people, there are already more than 22 retirees, and by 2050, the number will exceed 50. That means fewer people in factories and a heavier burden on those still working. A cultural shift also matters. Younger generations no longer want to work on assembly lines. About 60% attend university, choosing careers in technology, finance, or government. Surveys show that 80% of manufacturers face labor shortages, often missing between 10 and 30% of needed staff. Estimates suggest the shortfall could reach 30 million jobs. Rising wages, an aging population, and youth rejecting factory work are undermining the foundations of China's industrial dominance. This compressed spring of labor supply is pushing companies to look for alternatives, and many are already relocating production outside China. Pressure on Chinese industry is not only internal, the external environment has become an equally serious threat. At the center, of course, is the trade war with the United States. In 2024, China exported $3.6 trillion worth of goods, of which nearly $450 billion went to America. According to Goldman Sachs, up to 16 million jobs directly depend on U.S. demand. That is almost 2% of the entire workforce, but rising tariffs are putting this dependency at risk. Donald Trump's policies have already reshaped trade flows. Many Chinese goods now pass through Vietnam, Mexico, or Singapore to bypass the same tariffs. Official statistics understate the real volume of Chinese imports into the United States, but Washington's message is clear. Economic dependence on China is seen as a security threat, and tariffs have become the main weapon. This conflict has long moved beyond steel or smartphones. It involves advanced technologies and supply chains linked to defense. U.S. restrictions on semiconductors and the equipment needed to produce them have cut Chinese firms off from modern tools. And the prospect of a conflict over Taiwan makes the situation even more dangerous. The island produces more than 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most advanced chips. Any disruption there would hit global supply chains and deal a serious blow to Chinese industry. Even beyond the United States, China faces growing problems with key markets. Exports to the European Union now slightly exceed shipments to America, and sales to Asian countries are growing rapidly. But relations with Japan, India, and many Southeast Asian states are strained by disputes in the South China Sea and border conflicts. These tensions create uncertainty for China's long-term access to regional markets. For a country whose rise was built on open global trade, an atmosphere of tariffs, technological restrictions, and territorial disputes is becoming a serious drag. As competition intensifies, other countries are rushing to capture the very industries China risks losing. The erosion of China's advantage in cheap labor has opened the door to rivals, and many states have quickly filled the niche. Leading the way is India, with a working population of more than 960 million, which has already surpassed China in the number of working-age people. Factory wages in India are 5 to 7 times lower than in China's coastal regions, giving a clear cost advantage. That is why companies like Apple are expanding iPhone assembly in India. By 2027, forecasts suggest up to 25% of all smartphones will be produced there. The government is, of course, supporting this process with billions of dollars in subsidies, attracting investment in electronics and semiconductors. Vietnam is another growth hub. Over the past decades, its economy has nearly doubled, and in 2023, despite the global slowdown, the country posted growth above 5%. Major players such as Samsung, Google, and Nvidia have already set up production there, making Vietnam a key link in the global electronics chain. Vietnam's unique feature is that it combines export-oriented factories with strong domestic demand, creating a more balanced model. While China struggles with rising costs and labor shortages, its competitors are seizing the moment to capture industries that once seemed firmly anchored there. Yet China still reports growth of around 5% per year. Behind those figures, however, lies a heavy dependence on debt. According to official data, in 2024, the budget deficit was about 6.5% of GDP, while private estimates put it closer to 9%. The gap is covered by borrowed funds, which go to support local economies and industries that would otherwise slow down. The main burden falls on the so-called local government financing vehicles. These entities borrow money on behalf of provinces and cities, often outside the official budget. By 2024, their combined debt had reached nearly 66 trillion yuan, or about $9 trillion. Together with the debts of the central government, corporations, and households, the total volume of non-financial debt exceeded 310% of GDP, one of the highest levels in the world. Constant credit injections keep activity afloat, but it is a fragile strategy. Spending 8% of GDP to generate 5% growth is not a sustainable long-term solution. Rising interest payments and falling tax revenues make the situation heavier, while the hidden obligations of state-owned enterprises only increase the risk. Maintaining growth in China is increasingly possible only through new borrowing, but such dependence already shapes Beijing's choices, forcing it to seek more sustainable sources of development than debt. China's economic rise was more than numbers. For the Communist Party, steady growth is the foundation of legitimacy. The unwritten deal has long been that citizens give up political freedom in exchange for a rising standard of living. If that promise weakens, domestic pressure may intensify. China's era as the world's factory has reshaped the modern world, but its next chapter may rewrite it once again. China's rise created a new global order, yet cracks in its model have become clear. Competitors are gaining strength, factories are leaving, and the question is no longer whether change will come, but how fast it will unfold. Can China reinvent itself? or will others lead the new era of global trade? To follow how this struggle shaping the future of the world economy unfolds, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. See you in the next video.